One of the challenges that folks like Helen have come up against and other pastoral caregivers is the bias that professional caregivers, therapists, psychiatrists, even pastoral counselors have. That there are boundaries that need to be installed when one is going to be in a caregiving position. And the fear has been, do not let people who are just good, kindly church folks go out and do this because they don't have any boundaries. They will have their own agenda. They will try to save people. They will try to heal people. They will try to convert people. And when there are spiritual issues, religious issues around, we need to have real professionals doing this because it is such a delicate business. I'm going to come around at the end and say some more about that, but that is the cultural context where pastoral or spiritual caregivers are when it comes to wanting to serve folks in the kind of way that the Community of Hope does it. And so our training and our perspective is very important, not because we need to get psychiatrists' approval, but that we need to do our jobs well because we are there to be in service to others. As I thought about what I could say today, and I'm going to give you some of the usual stuff that y'all already know, but the image of the boundaries which there are in physical and spiritual life occurred to me. I didn't make handouts, but I've got made 2 copies of these pictures, and y'all can just pass these back. I do want them back for class 2. There are all kinds of boundaries and layers of life. Y'all are familiar with auras around our physical bodies. You are familiar with, if you've seen the picture of Earth, high up you see the layers of the atmosphere. There are all kinds of boundaries also in life. And the image that came to me when I was thinking about doing this with y'all is the reality of the cell. You've got the living cell, and around this cell is a membrane. No membrane, no cell. It is what keeps that organism alive and functioning. And it's got all kinds of stuff. Maybe some of y'all know biology, and they're just all these kinds of things. I remember in my high school biology, the mitochondria, for some reason, was the one that struck me as very interesting. So this membrane around the cell has certain basic functions. It anchors the cell in place, and it gives shape to the cell. It is responsible for attaching the cell to the extracellular environment. Most cells go into tissues, and as they group together, another important cell membrane function is the transportation of materials needed for the function of the cell organelles. Around the cell, besides other cells, are these fluids or enzymes or food or whatever, which need to be able to get into the cell so that the cell can survive. And so this has got to be a permeable membrane. It's not a hard cell like you would find in a plant. The movement of substances may either be at the expense of energy or passive. There is this transfer. There is this, I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. You know, you read this great paragraph in a book, and you say, well, I got to remember that, and you don't. I believe it's Lipton in his book, talked about that every cell in the body knows what every other cell in the body is feeling. That our whole system is an interconnected system. And so through the use of enzymes or other kinds of information being passed along, cells in the feet know what cells in the fingers or in the liver or the lungs are feeling. This idea that we all grew up with, that everything is compartmentalized, all these boundaries are fixed and stable and impermeable, nobody believes that anymore. That there is this constant flow of energy and information, and that we are, as everyone likes to say these days, we are all connected. The protein molecules in the cell membrane receive signals from other cells or the outside environment and convert the signals to messages that are passed to the organelles inside the cell. In some cells, the protein molecules in the cell membrane group together to form enzymes which carry out metabolic reactions near the inner surface of the cell membrane. And finally, the proteins in the cell membrane also help very small molecules to get themselves transported through the cell membrane, provided the molecules are traveling from a region with lots of molecules in the area to be able to move this through. So in summary, the membrane gives structure to the cell, connects cells together, is semi-permeable, allowing for the transfer of chemicals to and from the cell. I would like to shift this around now and think about not the transfer of chemicals, but the transfer of information. And so I'd like for you to think about what you do in your caring ministries as a meeting of boundaries and the transfer of information and caring. If you are a membrane here and you're, for lack of a better word, your care receiver is here, you each have this membrane, and your caring is based upon the ability for these two organisms to be able to share information. Emotional, intellectual, narrative, historical, psychological, whatever. But somehow there's got to be this bridge between you and your care receiver. And you've got to have boundaries in order for this to actually work. You need to know that they have a membrane, boundaries. You have boundaries. And the glory of this is how does this information and our love for others transfer from one to another. Here are some ways which occurs to me, and we'll talk where we're headed here in the next part is this thing on empathy, which is the way in which this information is transmitted. But there is the establishment of this intersubjective field between us. You receive information from the one you're caring for. You process the information within yourself. You experience, or there's the experience of understanding, and you relate that understanding to your care receiver, and the care receiver experiences being understood and cared for. This is what happens when you Community of Hope folks are in connection across the membrane between yourself and another. And the enzyme which you're using, as it were, is going to be empathy. This information comes in, and you process it. And as they experience your understanding of them, then they are helped in their spiritual journey. This is why it is so important that we understand this dynamic flow and how we can get messed up big time when these membranes become too porous on either party. The risks are that the boundary of the care receiver are too porous, and they threaten to overwhelm you. You have been with folks who are so needy. They are like a vacuum cleaner, and they need so much, they're just pulling this constantly out of you because they have these huge gaps in their membrane, and they're trying to get food inside here, and they're sucking it all from you. You know what that's like, and you know how exhausted you feel when you've been with someone like that, and why they are an especially challenging relationship, because you cannot satisfy the need. And that hurts our feelings, because we're supposed to be able to provide whatever anyone needs so that they can do better. But when you're trying to care for someone who is a bottomless pit, you will be just another one who's emptied themselves out. And the person then goes on to someone else who will try to care for them. Or the boundaries of the caregiver are too porous, with your interior experience becoming too active. We'll talk about this in more detail, but the risk here is that you start seeing yourself too much in that person, because they have triggered your own inner life too much. And then you start trying to deal with them as though they were you, and you were trying to solve your own problem by helping them solve the same problem. The membrane is too porous, and you're not able to see them as they are, mainly a different cell. They aren't you, but you're flowing into them too much. And if there is anything which the professionals are nervous about, is that folks who are untutored in this will begin to pour themselves out too much into their care receivers, and will break the boundaries of allowing the other person to be who they are and to become who they can be. That's why it's so important for us to know what we are doing when we are blessed with the opportunity to share a walk with the journey of someone else. Because at stake here is the basic living values and living energy of both people. And when you're messing around with this stuff, it is very, very powerful. And that's why you don't try this at home. This is for professionals only. For folks like us, it is important for us to know the dynamics and to be able to recognize the signals when we're getting too close. When we're getting too close to them, even if we never say it, we can feel it. Or we know that they are needing us too much. That's a warning signal. Now, when things go in a healthy way, the boundary of the care receiver is strengthened. They are, in a sense, the one we're caring for them, and because of the quality of care that we are giving, their boundary becomes stronger, which means that they're able to exist in a more powerful way for themselves, that they don't need us anymore. The whole goal of any kind of treatment, therapy, whatever, is termination. That's where we're headed. And so whatever accomplishes that internal strengthening for them, which will allow them to, in a happy way, say, thanks for the help, goodbye. That means that we have done our job. Now, if we get depressed because they don't need us anymore, well, then that's a different thing. The other healthy thing is the boundary of the caregiver, us, is secure and still receptive. Thinking of us here, this is our nucleus and all our little organelles. We cannot seriously attempt to help anyone unless our membrane, our boundary of who we are is secure. That we know ourselves, that we are solid within ourselves, that we are not subject to the ebbs and flows of someone else's feelings in this kind of relationship, and that we feel whole and strong within ourselves. If we are another needy person going to other folks thinking that if we can help others, that'll make us feel good about ourselves, we need to do some more growing first before we are strong enough. Our boundaries, our membranes are secure enough to allow us to be able to have this flow. This is really kind of like two cells again. Okay, that's lungs, I guess. And here we are, caregiver, care receiver. And we have our own histories, right? We weren't born yesterday. And here the person has their own history. And they've got some issues. The classic way of being helpful to someone else was through the myth of, I'm going to be a blank screen. You talk, I'll listen, and when you hear yourself getting the answer right, then I'll tell you and you're done. But I'm not going to give you anything back. That's the classic model of psychotherapy, that by just listening, we do the job of helping to heal. There are not very many psychoanalysts left, because you've got to be, I think, at least a really florid narcissist or neurotic in order to be able to do psychoanalysis. Most of us are not mature enough to do psychoanalysis because we're too needy. Freud's time, everybody was neurotic, everything was fine. We're not growing up, we're becoming more childish, I think. Okay, so here this person shares their experience, and I hadn't thought about this, across this membrane of our connection, okay? And it comes over here, and we understand what they are saying. I'm angry, whatever. I'm upset, whatever. Well, we know what anger is. We know what upset is. And we can understand. Now, I want to put a footnote here. When I was a baby chaplain, and I was trying to learn how to listen, because that's what you got to do. I thought, this is tough stuff. I don't listen very good. I get scared. I get upset. I try to fix. I do all kinds of things. I read this book recently that neurologists are saying listening and understanding what other people are saying is like breathing to human beings. We are made to understand one another. That is not rocket science. We come with the neurology that when we are listening to somebody, we know what they're feeling. We don't have to try to know what they're feeling. That's what it means to be human. And so I thought, oh, I wish somebody had told me that some years ago, that it comes naturally. I didn't know it came naturally. So your ability to understand what someone is feeling, you got it. You got it at birth. And so you're able to connect with what this person is sharing, and then you reflect back to them your understanding of what they're feeling. Okay? Now here is the tricky part. You've got your own experience, which helps you to understand this other person. It's your understanding that you reflect back to them, not your story. It's not about your story. You know your story. It helps you to understand this other person, but what you're interested in doing is freeing up their story. So the biggest mistake that most of us make is, you think that hurts, let me tell you about what hurts. You think you got a mother, I got a mother, let me tell you how bad it can get. And so we get trapped up into that. But here is the thing that makes this so challenging. Instead of reflecting back, so it sounds like you were having blah, 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 our own experience gets stirred up, and we start feeling our own issues instead of quietly observing ourselves and giving this back to them so that they can begin to observe themselves. The biggest risk is that when something somebody says over here ends up being about you. It's got to be enough about you so that you can reflect that you understand the issue, but you don't want your story to be so triggered that for the rest of the hour you're thinking about your mama instead of their experience with their mama. It is across this boundary, this membrane of caring, that goes back and forth, in the service that the membrane of this person becomes more secure. And it presupposes that your membrane is secure enough to carry the load. Now, this is what makes the kind of ministry that we do the perfect setting for spiritual growth. You can't listen to folks a lot and seriously without your own stuff getting triggered. So what are you going to do with it? It becomes a place for you to grow spiritually yourself, to develop your own spiritual gifts, to experience your own healing. Because if this is a wound here, it needs to be healed and not shared. They're the ones with the wounds. It's their wounds which matter during our caregiving. But when one of ours gets triggered, we need to deal with it. I'll go back to what I was saying about my son. Went through 2.5 years of chemo at Texas Children's. He got a great hit on chemo, which is the best thing that could happen. It means their plan A worked. Then I get called to do this ministry in the medical center. And I'm thinking, okay, we spent a lot of time at Texas Children's. the worst possible time in my life. I mean, bad. And that wasn't Robbie, that was me. So I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to feel when I go to Texas Children's? First day, I know that there's a patient over there who's Presbyterian. Don't worry, everyone else is safe. They only allow me to mess around with Presbyterian. And so I find the waiting room, and I walk in, and I look, and I walk back out, and I say, where's the waiting room? That's it, yeah, but where are the parents? And then you go back and you watch it. It's there. And I go back in there and say, no, when I was here, this room was huge. This is a huge room. And they said, no, this is it. And it was this little ordinary size room. But when we were there while he was in ICU, it just seemed so huge. I find the patient and his mama. And part of what was significant for me is that in the past, it would have been wrong for me to say, I know kind of what it's like to be here. Because it isn't about you, it's always about them. What I realized, though, without going into my experience with our son, I could say to her, I know something about what it is like being here because we spend a lot of time in rooms like this. And it's like, click, we're part of the same club. And I never have to say anything more about me. I don't have to say anything about Robbie. But that person knows that I understand something. It is the same thing when you're around in a meeting and someone stands up and say, hi, my name is Joe, I'm an alcoholic. The only one that Joe is ever going to listen to is when someone else says, hi, I'm Frank, I'm an alcoholic. It takes one to know one, and it takes one to help one. If you haven't been alcoholic, if you haven't had a kid have cancer, blah, blah, that does not mean you cannot care or even be very effective in the ministry. But if you have something that especially links you with them, then you have a deeper access and they feel understood in a deeper way. What I'm saying here is that you get to use your experiences to draw from to care about others. You don't tell your whole story. You don't tell them what Jesus did for you, he can do for them. But you are there to care and respect their experience. And that's very healing. I want to do 3 more things. Y'all have been through the class where you're not supposed to advise somebody, you're not supposed to one-up them, you're not supposed to educate them, you're not supposed to console or tell your story, you're not supposed to be a cheerleader, you're not supposed to be sympathetic, you're supposed to be empathic, you're not supposed to ask a bunch of questions, you're not supposed to explain stuff, you're not supposed to straighten them out, right? Y'all have been through the class. It occurred to me when I was looking over this nice list of all the things that we're not supposed to do, is that those are actually breaches of boundaries. If you start advising someone on what they ought to do, if you start cheerleading somebody, if you start consoling them or explaining things to them, you are injecting your own stuff across that membrane. And you are dishonoring what their experience is. Most of us will do stuff like that when we get scared, when we get overwhelmed. And so it always helps me to understand things, so I'm just sure if I explain it to you, you'll feel better too. We're actually trying to take care of ourselves. So one of the things, the errors that we make, in our caregiving end up being breaches of the boundaries, because the material that we are sharing or reflecting back has more to do with us than with them. Because the main thing that we are trying to do is to be so intentionally focused on that other person's soul that they know that we are seeing no one but them, and that they are the most important person in the world to us at that moment. Anything which diverts our attention away, it happens to all of us, but we need to keep pulling ourselves back to know that that's the most important thing, to be with them in that moment. And that's when the healing can begin to happen. And what is so great, and y'all have all been there, you see, you hear the healing taking place in them. They're seeing things in different ways. They're coming up with new alternatives. And you know, it wasn't because you suggested anything, because you didn't know what to do. They figured it out, and sure enough, it worked for them. There was a guy named Sharmer, and he talks about 4 kinds of empathy. I have such regard for the Community of Hope because y'all are committed to providing high-quality spiritual care the way I've been describing it, and that you have committed yourself to this community and to this quality. And so part of what is, because of your experience, you're going to understand these kinds of experiences. He talks about 4 layers. One is downloading. That's when you're sitting with your care receiver and they're going through their story, or you just met them for the first time and you're hearing stuff and you're thinking, yeah, I've heard that, yeah, it's tough, yeah, it's hard, this is bad, and you're just downloading the information. Sure, I've heard this 1,000 times, I get it, you know, keep going, you know, I'm with you. And then you begin to pay more attention, and here is the critical thing, to where their story is different from anybody else's story about their mama or about your experience of your mama. And you think, oh, I've never heard that kind of spin on this. Tell me more about that one. All the other stuff just fits into the pattern, but what gets your interest is, boy, this is unique about this person. It's very important to them. And so you hone in on what is different and distinct about them. And then the next layer for him is empathy. That is where this exchange begins to take place, this exchange of energy. And you are deeply focused on them. And so you move from just hearing the information to what is unique about them, and now you're really into that connection between you and them. You're in the flow. The two of you are together in the service of your care receiver. And then, number 4, he calls generative. And here is what is so exciting about this. You both connect to a deeper realm of emergence. Generative listening, or listening from the emerging field of future possibility. This level of listening requires us to access our open heart and our open will, our capacity to connect to the highest possibility that can emerge. We are getting ourselves out of the way in order to open up a space, a clearing that will allow for a different sense of God's presence. Okay. This is what we get to know, and we don't tell anybody we're doing it. There ain't no membrane because we are all in God. And when we can allow the emergence of the other person, then new possibilities that God has for them begins to emerge. And we realize for just a moment that we're one, that God is all and in all and through all. And this is about our being together with God. So everything I said about membranes is right. It is technically right, and y'all need to do it, and you need to do it well. But where you are headed, if God grants you the grace, you will have a moment when you are both in the presence of God and you both know it. And you are blessed and your care receiver is healed. Because there is no membrane between us and God. Okay. I told you more than I know. But that was new to me. And I'm very grateful for that. We got time? 2 minutes. Questions? Comments?
In that last description of the 4 levels, what was the third one?
Empathy.
The empathy was third. What was second?
He calls it factual.
Okay, thank you. Would you name those again?
Yeah, the first one is downloading. Factual, where you're really paying attention to the specifics and you hear something unusual. 3 is that empathic connection, and 4 is the generative, where new life emerges. And if you see this from a process point of view, it's a perfect fit. Because God is providing possibilities for us all of the time. The best available within our price range, within our history. But it's always there. And the issue is, can we be in a moment with someone who is safe enough for us to see what's possible? I mean, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Let me take a moment to say again that I am so grateful for the ministries which y'all provide. You have touched lots of lives, and you have been open to the Spirit's work in your life in order to be prepared and are being prepared to go even deeper. And so I honor you, and I wish you all the very best.